The Fairy type revolutionized Pokemon when it was added to the series. It became a hard counter to Dragon type Pokemon and has become one of the best types in competitive usage. Pokemon has pushed this type harder than any other type. Fairy type instantly received a box art legendary upon its introduction, when the Poison type, which has been around since Generation 1, had yet to have a legendary. Fairy type also added a Fairy type evolution to the roster, and a handful of Pokemon were given the Fairy type, which made obscure Pokemon like Granbull just slightly more viable. Pokemon being rebranded or given another type is extremely rare. The only other time this occurred was in Generation 2, when Magnemite and Magneton were given the Steel type. A lot of other Pokemon could have benefited from the Fairy type, and it would make sense. So in this video, let's discuss 5 Pokemon that should have been given the Fairy type. Keep in mind though that this is in no particular order. It's just 5 Pokemon I believe could have been given the Fairy type. Here are the rules. The Pokemon must thematically fit with the Fairy type to be a candidate. The Fairy type is defined by magical attributes, being based on whimsical creatures, have associations with nature and or healing, being cute, and of course the most defining trait of them all, being pink. As long as a Pokemon checks off at least one of these boxes, then they can be considered a candidate. The second rule is the Pokemon must have been created prior to Generation 6. This was the only time a mass amount of Pokemon were rebranded, so it doesn't make sense to include post-Generation 6 Pokemon in my opinion. If you want to see more Pokemon content, then please consider subscribing. And with that out the way, let's begin. At number 5 on the list, we have Meganium. Meganium embodies traits that closely align with the Fairy type, and could have benefited from this, which it desperately needs. Meganium is known to soothe and calm others by emitting an aroma. This aroma can also revitalize plants and foster harmony in those acting out in violence. This connection to nature and its healing abilities are key themes associated with the Fairy type. Meganium's design looks elegant as well, a trait commonly portrayed in Fairy-type Pokemon also. Its peaceful, gentle nature is something to be expected of a Fairy-type Pokemon. Instead of giving the entire Meganium line Fairy type, I think it's more reasonable if Meganium were to gain the type upon evolution. By making Meganium a grass Fairy type, it would gain a handful of Fairy type moves, and possibly it might no longer be considered the worst starter type Pokemon. Coming in at number 4 is Alomomola. Alomomola is a water-type Pokemon known for its healing and nurturing abilities, making it an ideal candidate for the Fairy type. It is known to be a protector of injured Pokemon, and its ability to restore them to health fits well with the Fairy-type Pokemon. And the fact Alomomola has behaviors associated with compassion, protection, and healing, it makes it becoming the Fairy type that much more convincing. Design-wise, Alomomola's heart-shaped body and soft pink coloration evokes feelings of love and kindness. Of all the colors a Pokemon is given, pink is definitely the de facto color for the Fairy type. If made a water Fairy type, Alomomola would gain more thematic depth and versatility in battle, making it a better representation for its nurturing role, while fitting perfectly within the mystical and kind-hearted nature of the Fairy type. Luvdisc has some overlapping similarities with Alomomola, so you can throw the Fairy type on it as well. Maybe even Milotic, since it's considered the most beautiful Pokemon of them all. And number 3 is the Lake Trio. Azelf, Mesprit, and Uxie are the bestowers of knowledge, emotion, and willpower. They also have names and designs reminiscent of the Fairy type. All 3 of them have appearances that suggest they are based on pixies, sprites, elves, and mythical creatures of that area. Azelf's name contains the word elf, Uxie's name contains the word pixie, and Mesprit's name contains the word sprite, all creatures that would be associated with the Fairy type. Their role in maintaining balance between emotion, knowledge, and willpower depict their mystical and spiritual connections that they can easily bestow and take away from others if they so choose. Overall, their names, powers, and appearances mirror the magical and otherworldly nature of fairy-like beings, so becoming a psychic Fairy type perfectly encapsulates them, especially from a lore perspective. Sitting at the number 2 spot, we have Celebi. Moving on from the legendary Lake Trio, we now have another Pokemon who is somewhat similar to them. Celebi uses its ethereal time-traveling powers to become the time-traveling guardian of the forest. As a mythical Pokemon, Celebi protects forests and restores dying plants to perfect health, attributes that are associated with fairy-type Pokemon for their magical properties. Celebi's design is a small and sprite-like creature, resembling that of a forest fairy. Back when Celebi was introduced in Generation 2, it made sense to give it the Psychic type, as Psychic was the closest type that could convey its powers. Psychic is a good fit, second only to Fairy type in my opinion. Psychic is all about using one's mind to manipulate things, such as telekinesis and future sight. But time traveling, a power that transports one's physical body to anywhere in time, is straight up magic. That is definitely something more associated with fairy types. And I am confident that if Celebi were to be introduced in Generation 6 or onward, it would have been given the grass fairy type. Now finally, at the number 1 spot is Blissey and its pre-evolutions. I know I said these aren't in any particular order, but in my opinion, no Pokemon deserves the fairy type more than the Blissey line. Blissey and its pre-evolutions are known for their nurturing nature and incredible healing abilities. They perfectly embody many characteristics of the fairy type, and as the ultimate caretaker, they provide happiness, comfort, and health to those around them, using their healing powers to alleviate pain. Their designs also correlate with fairy type aesthetics, with their soft, round appearance, gentle pink color, and a soothing expression evoke feelings of happiness and warmth. But my main reason why I believe they deserve the fairy type is because I view the Blissey, Clefable, and Wigglytuff lines as a trio. They were all pink, rotund, 3-stage normal types. The Togekiss lines came slightly later and they are white, but I still view it as part of their group, thus forming a quartet. The Clefable, Wigglytuff, and Togekiss lines received the fairy type, but for some reason the Blissey line didn't. They check all of the same boxes as the others, so why were they excluded? Perhaps they thought normal fairy type or mono fairy type for the Blissey line would be too good. That's the only explanation I can think of. Regardless, it baffles me why the fairy type was withheld from them. But anyways, that's gonna do it for the video. That's 5 Pokemon I believe should have been given the fairy type. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like my content, then please consider subscribing. Anyways, I'll catch you in the next one. Later.